Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in today. Welcome to It's Time for More Injury Funding, the podcast for all who want to learn about legal funding and its significance in the personal injury, workers' compensation, defective products, injury, and many other types of law practice domains. I'm your host, Laura, founder and CEO of More Injury Funding, the legal funding counselors with passion for law, medicine, legal funding, and heart for all suffering individuals. In today's episode, I'm honored to introduce Kristina Ducos, personal injury attorney and founding partner of the Ducos Firm, LLC, based in Atlanta, Georgia. Kristina is an award-winning personal injury attorney specializing in cases involving negligent security, animal bites, wrongful death, severe injuries, and car crashes. She has received multiple accolades, including being named in various top 40 under 40 personal injury attorneys lists by prestigious legal associations like American Association of Trial Lawyers, National Trial Lawyers, and many others. Today, we'll focus our discussion on the impact of personal injury cases on minors. And this is, I believe, first time we are talking about this particular theme. We'll cover topics such as trauma and non-physical injuries that minors may experience, strategies for structuring settlements to maximize their recovery, and the importance of educating clients on the legal process. Additionally, as it is around the election time, or just a little bit post-election time, we will also be exploring how elections can influence these issues. Stay tuned till the very end. As you know, the fun pop-up question is just around the corner. Welcome to It's Time for More Injury Funding podcast, Kristina.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
It's such a pleasure and honor. You've been practicing for how many years now altogether?
Almost a decade. 2026 will be a decade.
That's a long time.
Yep.
One of your specialties as a personal injury lawyer in Georgia is minors. Can you share some insights on how personal injury cases specifically impact minors, considering both the physical and emotional trauma they may endure?
Absolutely. So with minors, these cases are a little bit different than a typical motor vehicle collision or a dog bite when you deal with adults. Because with minors, unless it's a horrific collision, a major impact, a lot of their injuries, other than just going and getting checked out, make sure there's no broken bones, or getting a follow-up with their pediatrician, a lot of their injuries are normally hidden. What I call them, it's the non-physical injuries, the mental trauma, how it's affecting their everyday life now, because depending on the age of the minor, they're still growing. And another part that's hard about dealing with minors is understanding, depending on their age range, because obviously a 4 to 8-year-old is going to communicate with you differently of how an incident is impacting them versus a teenager who's 13, 16 years old. They're going to be able to elaborate and express themselves a lot better. So really the biggest difference I would say with handling a minor's case is looking and finding those hidden injuries that minor's not going to talk about every day, and adding value to them and putting a value on them for their future care.
And what would you say are some common non-physical injuries that minors may experience as a result of a personal injury? And how do these affect their overall well-being?
Absolutely. So it actually depends on the type of case. So I'll give you a few examples. The biggest one, for example, with a motor vehicle collision is I have parents all the time tell me, especially when they're younger, and if it was a bad collision, they don't want to get in the car anymore. It's a fight to get them to school. It's a fight to get them to daycare. It's a fight to go to the doctor, because the minute they know they're getting in the car, they're reliving that over and over in their head, and they don't know how to process those feelings. So that's one of the biggest complaints I have on motor vehicles. For another example, like a dog bite case, I've had parents tell me they've loved animals their entire life. Now they're afraid to go to the park and play. They're afraid if there's walking in the neighborhood, a dog is on the other side of the street, they'll run behind me, because now they just associate that trauma with every dog or every animal they see. On a negligent security case, I had one where the family was tied up and robbed in their own apartment, and that child did not want to sleep in that home anymore. Me as an adult, I personally wouldn't feel safe sleeping in that home anymore. So how do you explain that to a child, and then how do you overcome that? So those are just a few examples of how the non-physical injuries are really the value of that case and really compensating that minor appropriately.
Knowing you, Kristina, I know that you're not just an amazing attorney and a fantastic mom of a new baby, relatively new baby, but you're also a great psychologist. how important it is to educate clients, especially minors, about the legal process involved in their case, and what are some effective ways to do so?
So, one of the typical things I do on a minor case, especially if they've been seriously injured, or say they weren't physically seriously injured, but there's a lot of mental trauma, a lot of everyday things that is affecting their everyday life. I'll say 95% of the time, will associate a mental health therapist or a counselor that will be able to really dive in and talk to that minor and pull stuff out that they're maybe not expressing to mom or dad or expressing to me because I'm just an adult asking them a bunch of questions. Another thing I always go through with my minors, again, it depends on the age range of the minor, but one of the key things when they're less than 10 of, do you understand the difference between a truth and a lie? Can you explain to me, give me an example of a truth, give me an example of a lie? So when I'm explaining to them the importance of being honest and telling me the truth, they understand that. Obviously with teenagers, it's a bit different. Teenagers, as we all know, don't really want to talk to their parents, so they're not going to tell their parents everything. I've had a lot of my teenage clients who will call me and tell me more stuff that they've never told their parent, which is a little weird. But so things like that. But my typical go-to is I make sure I have some sort of therapist who's at least evaluated that child to see, is the trauma really associated with this incident, or is there other background stuff going on that I don't know about that parents haven't relayed to me, so we could really iron out what their real true injuries are.
With regards to minors, what are some key considerations when it comes to decision making in legal matters, and how do you ensure their best interests are safeguarded throughout the whole entire legal process?
Absolutely. So some of the key things, especially with my minor cases, again, depends on the type of incident that occurred, the seriousness of their injuries. But one key thing I always consider when I'm going to put that case into a lawsuit, say we weren't able to resolve it for a good settlement number, and I put that into a lawsuit, is I also factor in the mental trauma being in court and having to replay and re-talk about this incident multiple times, how it's going to affect that child. Because I've had children whose parents are, no, I want to file a lawsuit. And then the child gets in the room and everything's fine. Nothing's wrong with me. And it's because they're intimidated. They have all these strangers asking them all these questions. They're afraid for some reason they're going to get in trouble, even though none of this is their fault. So that's one key thing I meet with the minor. Make sure they're comfortable with that. You're comfortable with talking to me. Are you comfortable with talking to this doctor? And also explaining that to the parents, because I've had parents before tell me, she's been doing a lot better with her therapy coping mechanisms. I don't want to re-traumatize her. I don't want to have to keep talking about this. So that's a key thing sometimes where it's not worth, yes, we might get, an additional amount if we put it into a lawsuit. But if that trauma is going to set that child back, that's not in their best interest. And that's my goal, is protecting their best interest. Even though there might be more money out there, if the parent wants to put it to bed, if it's a good settlement offer, they're going to be protected, regardless of my feelings. If I think someone should pay them $1 million, if they don't want to do it, I have to advocate for my client and best advocate for their best wishes.
Thank you so much for being such a, sensitive and caretaking attorney to these children. Really appreciate it. In the context of recent elections in Georgia, how can the outcome of political races impact the legal system and ultimately the cases of minors involved in personal injury litigation?
So I love that topic, because where this usually comes into play is I tell everyone's always worried about presidential elections, but the laws that affect your everyday life, the president isn't creating. It's your state legislators who are creating these new laws, changing old laws. And recently in Georgia, we've had tort reform, where actually they framed it and it was supported. Again, politicians, they have elections. Who are their biggest contributors? Normally big corporations, especially the insurance industry, where they try to portray it to Georgians of, oh, your insurance rates are going to go down. Too many excess verdicts are being paid out. The insurance company is going to go bankrupt. Well, statistics actually prove insurance companies are making more money than ever. If anyone's renewed their policies recently, policies have all gone up, not gone down. So this law that all this tort reform changed in Georgia didn't actually protect anyone that they said it was going to protect, to lower insurance rates, lower anything. It's kind of like the example I give everyone with the president when he said he was going to lower grocery prices. Like, have we ever actually seen that happen yet? So I always tell them, Your local politicians are the most important because they're the ones that are going to affect your case. God forbid you ever get injured. And the laws governing what type of evidence we could use, insurance policy limits. And that's normally the biggest frustration, especially if I have a seriously injured minor. Georgia law only requires $25,000 in insurance if you're operating a motor vehicle. Well, if that minor had to go to get an airlift to a hospital because the trauma was so bad, they're basically not seeing a penny of that. And granted, it comes into having a good attorney who's going to at least protect that little minimal settlement we can get for them. But those are the things that it really affects. And I always have constant complaints from parents of 25,000 or 50,000. That's not enough. I completely get it. I wish I could get them $1 million. But if that's all the insurance that covers it, I can't do anything outside of that. So I always like to educate them on, you need to vote for this senator. You need to look into who's actually protecting you as an everyday average citizen.
And how do you encourage your clients, your friends, your family to go to vote? By talking to them, posting on social media?
I even have for my firm, all of our clients have an app on election day, even the week leading up. We sent out a mass text to our client. Look in your area, your local representatives that are running. This is how it affects it. A little mini blurb, just educating them and a reminder because, I get it. People are busy running work, life balances, things like that. But it really is vital. And I even in my own family, my husband, when we first met, never voted other than when he was 18 because he got to do the whole 18 and vote. But now he sees how much it impacts even our local representatives down to city council, things like that, how much it impacts everything in your everyday life. So I always just try to educate as much as possible, encourage as much as possible. But again, it's on the reader, whoever's taking in this knowledge to actually apply it.
I love it. How does being an advocate for minors in legal proceedings differ from representing adults, particularly in terms of ensuring their voices heard and their rights are protected?
Absolutely. So the biggest main thing I tell everybody is money. When you have an adult, they're concerned about the money, the dollar amount. When it's a minor, they don't have any idea about money. Let's be honest. They don't have a concept of money and the value and things like that. So I think that's the biggest aspect is the money aspect, because when it comes to minors, they don't care about that dollar amount. My job as their attorney is really advocating for them. And it really comes into play with those future care, even if it's not future medical treatment they need. If they're going to need to see a therapist for the next 3 years, just to deal with their everyday life and overcoming this trauma, or if they have PTSD, things like that. I'm worried more so about their long-term care. Are they going to have the medical treatment they need or the mental health treatment they need? Are they going to need any accommodation? So like for one case, I had a minor whose leg was fractured. He was in elementary school and he had to have an aide now go to school with him every day. He needed to take extra time for testing. So we had to get him an IEP plan, which is an individualized education plan for school. Those are things I think about, especially from the standpoint of what extra care is he now going to need that he wouldn't need if this happened. And I factor that in where, granted, insurance companies might not look at that value. They're going to say, well, okay, well, the school made an accommodation, big deal. Well, guess what? What you're not thinking about is now that 8-year-old feels less like he feels like an outsider. He has to be taken into a different classroom to take his testing. Kids are mean nowadays. I have plenty of cases where they do have physical injuries, maybe a scar on their face, where the kids are picking on them. People don't think about that, but those are things I think about and always put a dollar value on, because if that little kid has to go to school now every day and is getting bullied because he has a scar across his face, there is a dollar amount we need to put on that, because that's trauma he's going to now have to live with until hopefully he gets old enough and the kids grow up and mature and stop picking on him.
And attorneys or regular people, who don't practice law and who don't work with minors don't really understand how these processes work, how to litigate a case with a minor. Could you, Kristina, walk us through a specific case where you represented a minor in a personal injury case and discuss the unique challenges you encountered in advocating for their best interests?
Absolutely. So kind of tagging on to what I had just commented about, I had a specific case. It was a dog bite case where my minor client, she was about 8 years old. She was in the 3rd grade and she was with dad at a family barbecue at a friend's house, and their French bulldog bit her on the face. Well, the way
Mm.
the dog bit her, her lip was slit open. She had to have 3 surgeries just to make the stitches and everything go away. We're also talking about a minor, so got infected at one point. But her biggest issue, and mom's biggest issue, is when she went back to school, the kids really started bullying her. That she started not wanting to go to school. She started making excuses. I don't feel good today, things like that. And we finally, after we got her with a therapist, realized it's nothing, it's because she doesn't feel comfortable the way she looks now. She's getting picked on. So that was one thing in her lawsuit where they kept focusing on the injuries. Yes, we understand it was really bad. It was a bad bite. She had to have stitches and surgery. But what they weren't factoring in is she's going to need a future cosmetic surgery to minimize the scar. She can't do that recommended by the dermatologist until I think they said 10 years old, and then another one when she maybe turns 18. So I'm looking at the future costs of those cosmetic surgeries. Whether she decides to get them or not, that's her decision, but it's something that has been offered. But also, I'm sitting here thinking about how long this little girl has to go to school and risk getting bullied. Because if you're saying the second procedure can't happen until she's 18, she's going to grow up and she's now going to be self conscious about that scar right in the middle of her face. Every time she's talking, someone's going to look at it. That's where insurance companies don't look at proper values. And a good experienced attorney who deals with minors, they're going to harp on that because that's a permanent scarring now, is how I treat it. Whether it starts to diminish, maybe she won't even see it when she's 18. But right here to now and today, when we're in court, that's what my argument is. And so that was one case where we filed a lawsuit and we ended up getting 8 times the initial offer because once we were litigating and once they were deposed and once they heard everything the mom's having to go through now, the therapist notes, they really saw it's not just about the medical bills from these surgeries. It's about this future care. And this little girl has the rest of her life to live with this now, on top of the fact she's petrified of dogs. She had to give up her own dogs. So that's one specific case I always use because the value came not by harping on the injury, but by harping on the post-traumatic stress this is causing her, her physical, she's not confident in herself as a young woman growing up, especially in the age of social media where everyone wants to look perfect. And that's what really made the case value soar.
Oh, so much for sharing the story with us. In what ways do non-physical injuries, such as emotional trauma or mental health impacts, play a significant role in personal injury cases involving minors? And how do you approach, Kristina, addressing these aspects in your legal representation?
Absolutely. So again, focusing on the emotional aspects, even if a therapist hasn't diagnosed them with, let's say, PTSD, but they're having all of a sudden trouble sleeping at night. They're all of a sudden wetting the bed. They haven't done that in years. They are getting picked on at school. They're afraid to go to school. I've represented minors who were attacked inside of the school. Other trauma is, like, for example, getting into the car. If you're not getting in the car now, being afraid of animals. These are all the things that is not going to be on a medical record. And that's what we harp on. That's what we focus on. And looking at that future pain and suffering aspect, that's what I always focus on. Even if they're all healed, they had a fractured bone, they did a surgery, their leg healed, they're fine. I had one minor who was like a little mini young football star, on national list. He was, I think, in a 12-year-old age group. Well, after he broke his leg, he tried to go play football and he didn't play the same way. And he started getting frustrated with himself and he just ended up quitting. And this is someone whose parents, he'd been in a league ever since he was, probably 4 or 5 years old. And so now the parents are looking like, we've invested all this money. He doesn't want to play it anymore. We're noticing a decline in just his everyday moods. He's having mood swings now. And it was because he didn't have that football outlet anymore. He didn't have his hobby he enjoyed doing because he couldn't move the same way. So different things like that is what I really focus on. And again, that goes towards protecting their future interests because they don't care about the money. They don't know about that money. And half the time they're not going to see that money until they're 18, but it's preparing them. So when they do need it, they have it there accessible for that.
Mm-hmm. And minors are little people, and so their parents are there to represent them when it comes to finances, after the case settles. How do you go about structuring settlements for minors in personal injury cases to ensure that their long-term needs are well protected after the case is resolved?
Absolutely. So there are, as far as structuring the settlements, I always make sure when I have a minor settlement, I'm either looking at annuity options, a CD option, depending on their age. because I'm trying to see the money that I'm getting them in their settlement, how they could get a higher return on it by the time they reach, in Georgia, it's 18 years old. That's pretty much standard throughout the United States. But protecting that money where it's growing for them until they reach it. Another thing I do too is I always advise the parents. I despise handing an 18-year-old six figures. What I'd rather do is let's let their money help them grow so they have it, that it lasts, until they're 25 years old. So a lot of the structured settlements I'll do is they'll have a payout when they're 18 and maybe get a check twice a year until their time they're 25. That way, if they want to start a business when they're 18, they have the money. If they want to pay for college, they have the money. Things like that. But that way you don't just give an 18-year-old, $300,000 and they blow it in a year. So that's another thing I do to definitely protect them. And of course, I always make sure the parents sign off on it. I'm making sure out of the annuity options, which is protecting their money the most, who has access to it. God forbid something happens to them and the money to the annuity needs to be accessed earlier. I cover all of that with my minor settlements. And that's really important because it's great when you get a great case result, but if you just hand that money to the minor, in my personal opinion, you're not really protecting their best interest.
As an attorney representing minors and in personal injury cases, how do you navigate the intersection between legal advocacy and social justice to ensure that your clients receive fair and just treatment within the legal system?
Absolutely. So one joke we have in my law firm is Kristina will sue anyone and try anything. So we joked about, I'm all about loopholes. So even if there is law, and normally this happens with my minors who are injured at school or by some sort of government entity that's, the liable party. Here is, I always tell them, I will file this lawsuit. I will try. The only way to change law is to develop new case law. So I will try. But what I really do is I educate the parents on this is what the law is. This is what I have to prove. Now, here's the loophole in this, and this is what we're going to try to do. But I'm very honest with my clients, and I think that's why I have such a return client base or referral base, because I tell them, hey, I'm here to tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. That is my job as my advocate for you. So I'm going to show you all the good parts about your case. I'm going to show all the hurdles we have to get over as far as the law and what I actually have to prove. But here's this loophole, and we're going to harp on this loophole. And I'll give them handouts, educational things for my minors. I have some educational videos that we share and send to them that they could watch that just explain it in the terms that a kid will understand, especially if they're going to have to go and testify in court, things like that. So I always tell everyone, I have a bleeding heart for social justice. So even if I know there's probably a 1% chance this case will survive a motion for summary judgment and survive getting to a jury, I'm going to at least try, because the only way we could create new case law is trying and appealing and trying to make new case law and going that avenue. Otherwise, we're just going to be stuck with these terrible laws.
How do you ensure that minors and their families are well informed and educated about the legal process when pursuing a personal injury claim? What are some key aspects of legal education that you believe are crucial for minors to understand in order to be well equipped and also, to be at peace?
Absolutely. So in minor cases, a large part is educating the parents, because parents always have, and just as adults in general, they have a theory of what the law is versus what the law actually is. And what I tell them is, I completely understand you. Morally, you would think that's the right move. This happened on their property, or they did this to you. They know their dog did this to you, or they know they caused the collision, things like that. However, what the law actually says we have to prove is X, Y, and Z. And I give handouts. We have educational videos. And I actually make the parents sign a document that says they've read the handout that explains the case law governing their case. Here are the good parts about their case. Here are the hurdles we're going to have to overcome. That way, because litigation is very emotionally tolling, especially when someone has to relive it over and over, when parents have to take off of work. Because the parents also, even though it's a minor's case, they have to be involved in the lawsuit process. So you have to factor in taking off time off of work, bringing your kid to court, sitting for a trial, things like that. So we do a lot of educational handouts. We have videos for the minors. The one key thing I find with parents, and this is normally the parents' complaint, is, well, why can't I get any of the settlement money? I had to take off of work. I had to, pay for X, Y, and Z out of my pocket because he needed X, Y, and Z. What I always tell parents is, I understand where you might have had to come out of pocket. You had to take time off of work. You had to pay someone to watch him while he was recovering, things like that. However, what the law says is any settlement over 25,000, a judge has to approve. And in the almost decade of me practicing, I have never had a judge approve a parent actually receiving any of the settlement funds unless it was to pay for a medical treatment that was necessary and was already scheduled. Because the theory behind judges and what has been explained in numerous court hearings is your child's sick, your child has to be taken care of, you have to take care of work. That's part of being a parent. That's not your child's responsibility to cover rent or anything that you missed out on because they were injured. They're the ones with the injury. So usually 99% of the time, all the money for that minor is going to go into annuity. It's going to sit to their 18, where parents will be like, oh, but they have these sports I have to pay for, and they have this and that. That's part of being a parent, not my decision. Again, it's also why important electing judges, electing officials who are changing these laws, putting them into place, changing the dollar amount threshold. But that's usually where parents will get frustrated is why can't I get any money? I'm the one that's also been impacted. But really what the law says is that money is for the minor, their claim, their pain and suffering. The only things a parent can be reimbursed for is any medical bills they paid out of pocket. But that is the key thing I find in every minor's case, especially when a parent wants me to file a lawsuit for X amount of dollars. That's one of the first things. Okay, but you understand, and I agree, this case is worth more money. But if we go past this threshold, the judge is not going to issue any of the money to you. It's going to go to the minor. And I actually prefer that anyway. I go to sleep well at night knowing I protected my client, that their parent couldn't just take their money and run with it and go buy a new car, go buy a new house, even though that might benefit the child. That's not what that money was paid out for.
And if somebody is looking for your expertise in working with minors in personal injury space or has a question about personal injury in general, how can they locate you, Kristina?
Absolutely. So my website, ducoslaw.com, it explains all the different types of cases we handled. We even have a live virtual assistant with a chat box that if you're curious if you have a case or not, you can put in your information in there. It'll come directly to me. We can have a consultation. I always tell people I do free consultations. Even if you had another attorney, just want a second opinion, I don't mind doing those at all. Because again, I'm more about educating the community. Another way is our Instagram, our social media. We do plenty of educational videos for clients on all different types of cases. So our Instagram is Ducos Law LLC. So you can find us there. And of course, you could just call our main office line, which is 678-628-2667. There's plenty of ways to get in touch with me. I make myself available to all clients within 24 hours. So yeah, reach out. Let us know if you have any questions. We love educating, and we also do free case consultations.
I love it. Kristina, thank you so much again for talking to me today about the minor personal injury cases. But before I let you go, I have one last question. Mm-hmm. If you could choose any historical figure to represent in the personal injury case, who would it be and why?
Ooh, that's a good one. Okay, so I'm going to say, let's say Rosa Parks, because I could give a good legal analysis with this. Even just if you related it to times today, obviously our whole social justice system was messed up back then. But even if you applied it in terms today, could you imagine if a bus operator allowed people to come on and just attack you and brutalize you, didn't do anything, didn't call for help, and just sat there? I would not only go after obviously the assailants who attacked her, but also that bus driver and the company that owned the bus that allowed this to happen and attack her. There's multiple avenues. So I like that aspect, because on top of the social justice and fighting for what's right, there's also a real claim there of you just allowed an attack to happen and sat back and let it happen. And to me, that is just pure negligence, active negligence. You didn't do anything to intervene. You didn't protect your transportees, anything like that. So I think that would be one that I could still relate to today. And we would have multiple cases against multiple defendants.
Thank you. That again was Kristina Ducos with the Ducos Firm LLC based in Atlanta, Georgia. We covered the effects of personal injury cases on minors, including trauma and non-physical injuries, strategies for maximizing minor settlements, and educating clients on the legal process as emphasized today, with consideration for how elections can impact these matters on the eve of election day, as we recently had it going. I want to thank you all for watching and listening to our episode today. For more tips and tricks on legal funding and personal injury law related topics, follow me, like, and subscribe to Sign for More Injury Funding podcast on YouTube and all podcast platforms worldwide, and follow More Injury Funding at moreinjuryfunding.com. I can't wait to see you, my dear viewers and listeners, at my next upcoming episode. Until then, be well. Thank you.
Thank you.